She grabbed his sleeve and whispered, "Please pretend you're my dad," just as the man hunting her stepped out of the shadows. The man froze when he realized who she'd chosen, Xavier Alonso, the last person anyone runs to for help. And the moment Xavier looked down at her, he knew pretending would cost blood, just not whose. If this story pulled you in, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what's coming next. I've got another unforgettable story dropping tomorrow. And while you're here, jump into the comments and tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing our community from all around the world. Alright, let's get back into it. It was a Thursday evening in the kind of alley most people avoid, narrow, poorly lit, wedged between shuttered buildings that haven't seen legitimate business in years. Trash bags were stacked against brick walls, rainwater pooling in the uneven concrete, and a single neon sign flickered at the far end, casting everything in sickly green light. The air smelled of wet asphalt, rotting garbage, and the metallic tang that always preceded violence. This was the kind of place where deals were made quietly and people disappeared without witnesses. Xavier Alonso stood near the mouth of the alley, checking his watch with practiced patience. Business meeting, routine collection, nothing he hadn't done 1,000 times before. He was impeccably dressed despite the rain-tailored black suit that probably cost more than most people made in a month, collar open to reveal dark tattoos creeping up his neck like shadows made permanent. His dark hair was slicked back, face carved with sharp angles that could have been handsome if they weren't so cold. At 6'3", he filled the space around him with an authority that required no introduction. Xavier Alonso didn't need to announce himself. His reputation did that for him. 20 years building an empire in the criminal underworld had taught him that silence was more powerful than threats, and reputation more deadly than any weapon. He controlled shipping routes, gambling operations, protection rackets across 3 districts. Politicians returned his calls. Police looked the other way. Rivals disappeared. He was feared, respected, and utterly untouchable. But then he heard it. Small footsteps, running, uneven and desperate, splashing through puddles. Xavier's instincts sharpened immediately. His hand moved instinctively toward the weapon concealed beneath his jacket. Decades in this world had taught him to recognize real fear, and this wasn't someone running late. This was someone running from. He turned just as she appeared. A little girl, no more than 6 years old, burst around the corner looking over her shoulder. Her blonde hair hung in 2 bedraggled ponytails that bounced as she ran, her small frame wrapped in a gray dress now soaked through. Her face was streaked with tears and terror, her blue eyes wide with panic that no child should ever know. And then she saw him. Most people froze when they saw Xavier Alonso. They registered the tattoos, the suit, the cold authority radiating from him like winter air, and they made themselves scarce. But this little girl didn't hesitate. She ran straight toward him, her small hands reaching out, and grabbed his sleeve with both fists. Her teddy bear brown, worn, missing one eye was crushed between them as she pressed against his leg. "Please, please pretend you're my dad." Xavier froze completely. In his entire life, no one had ever asked him to protect them. To fear him, yes. To pay him, absolutely. To disappear problems. To enforce loyalty. To break those who crossed lines, these were familiar requests. But this? A child clinging to him like he was salvation instead of damnation? He was the man people crossed the street to avoid. The man whose name closed doors and ended conversations. The man mothers pulled their children away from in whispered warnings. Never talk to men like that. Never look them in the eye. Never, ever ask them for help. But this little girl was pressing closer, her whole body trembling like a leaf in a hurricane, trusting him with a desperation that made something crack in his chest. Xavier's eyes moved past her, scanning the alley with the precision of someone who had survived by seeing threats before they materialized. And then he saw him. A man emerged from the shadows near the building entrance, mid-30s. Well-dressed in dark slacks and a pressed button-down shirt, clean-cut, ordinary, the kind of person who could blend into any crowd, sit in any restaurant, walk past any playground without raising suspicion. Except for his eyes. They swept the alley with cold calculation, searching, assessing, hunting. When they landed on the girl, something predatory flickered across his face before he smoothed it into false concern. The little girl pressed herself behind Xavier's legs, making herself as small as possible. Her voice dropped to a terrified whisper that only he could hear. "That man isn't my dad," he said. "He said he was taking me to see my mama. But when I tried to run, he grabbed my arm. Please don't let him take me." Something shifted in Xavier's chest. Something unfamiliar and razor-sharp, cutting through 2 decades of carefully constructed detachment. He didn't need to hear another word. Xavier instinctively lowered himself to one knee, bringing his face level with hers. His large hand, scarred, tattooed, designed for violence, rested gently on her small shoulder. When he spoke, his voice was low but steady, carrying the weight of an unbreakable promise. "Stay close to me," he said, meeting her terrified blue eyes directly. "You're safe now." The relief that flooded her face nearly broke something inside him he'd thought was long dead. The man spotted them. His stride changed, purposeful now, but measured. He was approaching, but carefully, like someone trying not to spook a dangerous animal. Then he got close enough to see Xavier's face clearly in the flickering neon light. Recognition hit him like cold water. His steps faltered. His expression flickered fear, calculation, desperation, warring for dominance. Xavier saw it all in less than a second. "You're Alonso." The name hung in the rain-soaked air between them like a death sentence. The man knew exactly who he was facing now. That should have been enough to make him turn around and disappear into the city's shadows. But he didn't. That told Xavier everything. This man wasn't just desperate. He was operating under protection, under orders, under the assumption that whatever consequences might follow were worth the risk, or that there wouldn't be consequences at all. Xavier stood slowly, deliberately, his 6'3" frame rising like a mountain between the girl and her pursuer. He positioned himself fully in front of Ellen, creating an impenetrable wall of muscle and lethal intent. The man recovered his composure, forcing a smile that never touched his cold eyes. "There's been a misunderstanding," he said, his voice too smooth, too practiced. "That's my niece. She wandered off while we were shopping and—" "No," Xavier interrupted quietly. "Just one word. Absolute." The man's jaw tightened. His hand shifted slightly toward his jacket. Xavier's eyes tracked the movement with predatory focus. Behind him, small fingers dug desperately into his suit jacket, and in that moment, standing in a rain-soaked alley with a terrified child trusting him with her life, Xavier Alonso made a decision that would shatter everything he'd built and reveal the man he'd buried beneath the reputation. The rain drummed harder against the pavement, filling the silence between three people locked in a moment that could explode into violence at any second. Xavier felt the little girl's fingers dig deeper into his jacket, her breathing quick and shallow against his back. The man took a careful step forward, his hands visible now, palms open in a gesture of false peace. His smile stayed plastered across his face, the kind of smile that belonged in a family photo, not a dark alley at night. "Look, I understand how this looks," the man said, his voice reasonable, almost apologetic. "But Ellen needs to come with me. Her mother is worried sick. You know how kids are. They get scared over nothing, make up stories. Ellen." So he knew her name. That detail landed in Xavier's mind like a stone dropping into still water, ripples of implication spreading outward. This wasn't a random encounter. This was planned, researched, targeted. Xavier's voice came out low and measured, the tone he used when giving orders he expected to be followed. "The girl stays with me. I really don't think you understand the situation here," the man continued, taking another step. His confidence was returning now, building with each word. "Her mother hired me to pick her up. There's been a custody dispute, you see. The father's been—" "Stop talking," Xavier said quietly. The man stopped. Not because he wanted to, but because something in Xavier's voice made it clear that the next words out of his mouth might be his last. Xavier shifted slightly, angling his body so he could see both the man and the mouth of the alley behind them. His instincts were screaming now, the same instincts that had kept him alive through 2 decades of betrayals, ambushes, and power plays. Something was wrong, not just with this man, but with the entire situation. "Ellen," Xavier said softly, not taking his eyes off the threat in front of him. "Is your mother hurt? Is she waiting for you somewhere?" The little girl's voice came out small and broken. "I don't know," he said. "He said she was in the hospital, that she asked him to come get me from the park, but when I asked which hospital, he wouldn't tell me. And then he grabbed my arm when I tried to run to the park office." Xavier felt something cold and sharp settle in his chest. He'd heard hundreds of lies in his life. Thousands, probably. He'd told enough of them himself to recognize the truth when he heard it. This child was telling the truth. The man's face tightened, his mask slipping for just a second. "Ellen, sweetheart, you're confused. You know your mom asked me to—" "What's her mother's name?" Xavier interrupted. The man blinked. "What? Her mother. What's her name?" A pause. Too long. Sarah Clark." Xavier felt Ellen's grip loosen slightly, not in relief, but in something worse. Resignation. Despair. The response of a child who'd just heard her worst fears confirmed. "Her name is Rebecca," Ellen whispered. "Not Sarah." The man's expression changed. The false warmth evaporated, replaced by cold calculation. His hand moved toward his jacket again, this time with clear purpose. Xavier moved faster. One fluid motion, his hand shot out and caught the man's wrist before it reached whatever weapon was hidden beneath the fabric. The grip was iron, crushing, the kind of hold that stopped blood flow and sent warning signals screaming through nerve endings. "Don't," Xavier said simply. The man tried to pull away, his face contorting with pain. Xavier held firm, his other hand moving to the man's jacket and pulling it open. No gun. Instead, something fell from the inside pocket and clattered to the wet pavement. A phone. The screen was lit, unlocked, displaying a text message conversation. Even from this angle, even in the dim light, Xavier could see enough. Messages, multiple conversations, names he didn't recognize, and images, small thumbnails that made his blood run cold. Children. Xavier's grip tightened involuntarily. The man gasped, his knees buckling slightly. "Please," the man wheezed. "You don't understand. I'm just the pickup. I was supposed to—" He stopped, realizing his mistake. "Supposed to what?" Xavier's voice dropped to something barely above a whisper, but infinitely more dangerous than any shout. "Deliver her somewhere? To someone?" The man's eyes darted toward the phone on the ground, then back to Xavier's face. Fear was replacing calculation now. Real fear. The kind that came from realizing you'd walked into something far worse than you'd anticipated. "I didn't know who she was with," the man stammered. "I swear, if I'd known it was Xavier Alonso, I never would've, but you'd still take her." Xavier finished. "Just not from me." Behind him, Ellen pressed closer. Xavier felt her small body trembling, heard her trying to stifle sobs. She was 6 years old. She should be worried about homework and cartoons and what game to play at recess. Not this. Never this. Xavier had built his empire on fear and violence. He'd enforced loyalty through intimidation, maintained order through calculated brutality. He'd crossed lines that most people didn't even know existed. He'd told himself it was business, that there were rules, boundaries, codes that separated men like him from true monsters. But standing in that alley, holding a man who trafficked children, Xavier realized something that changed everything. He'd been lying to himself. There were no degrees of evil, no sliding scale of acceptable crimes. There were only choices. And predators who hurt children didn't deserve mercy. Xavier released the man's wrist and in one smooth motion, swept his legs out from under him. The man hit the wet pavement hard, gasping. Before he could recover, Xavier's foot pressed down on his chest, not enough to crush, but enough to pin, to dominate, to make absolutely clear who held power in this moment. Xavier pulled out his own phone with one hand, keeping Ellen shielded behind him with the other. His thumb moved across the screen, finding a contact he'd never thought he'd use for something like this. "What are you doing?" the man gasped. Xavier looked down at him, his expression colder than the rain falling around them. "Making a call," he said quietly. "You're going to tell me everything. Who you work for, where you were taking her. Every name, every location, every detail. And if I don't?" Xavier's smile was terrifying in its complete absence of warmth. "Then I stop being civilized." The man pinned beneath Xavier's foot was breathing hard, his chest rising and falling in rapid panicked gasps. Rain poured down, mixing with the sweat beading on his forehead, but he wasn't talking. Not yet. Xavier applied slightly more pressure. Not enough to break ribs, but enough to make breathing uncomfortable. Enough to communicate that comfort was a privilege that could be revoked at any moment. "I'm waiting," Xavier said. The man's eyes darted between Xavier's face and the phone still lying on the pavement, its screen beginning to dim. Whatever was on that device terrified him more than the Mafia Boss standing over him. "I can't," the man wheezed. "You don't know who you're dealing with. They'll kill me. They'll kill my family. They have people everywhere, police, judges, social services. You can't fight them." "Watch me," Xavier said flatly. Ellen shifted behind him, and Xavier felt her small hand grip the back of his jacket again. He'd almost forgotten she was there almost, but not quite. Her presence was a constant weight, a reminder that this wasn't about territory or reputation, or the careful balance of power he'd maintained for 20 years. This was about a 6-year-old girl who'd trusted him when she had no reason to. Xavier crouched down, keeping his weight distributed so the man couldn't move, and picked up the fallen phone. The screen lit up at his touch, still unlocked. What he saw made something dark and violent unfurl in his chest. The messages were coded, but not well. Years of running criminal operations had taught Xavier to read between lines, to spot patterns, to understand the language people used when they thought they were being clever. Package ready for pickup. Location: Riverside Park, northeast entrance. Confirmed. Delivery by 19. Client waiting. Bonus if merchandise is undamaged. Merchandise. They called children merchandise. Xavier scrolled further, his jaw tightening with each new conversation. There were photos not explicit, but cataloging. Children of different ages, different appearances, each with clinical descriptions like they were products in a warehouse. Blonde, 6 years old, compliant. Brown hair, 8 years old, shy. The efficiency of it was nauseating. And then he saw the payments. Transactions recorded in a separate app linked to the messaging thread. Numbers that made his blood run cold not because they were large, but because they were routine, frequent. This wasn't an isolated operation. This was a system. "How long has this been running?" Xavier asked, his voice dangerously quiet. The man clamped his mouth shut. Xavier leaned closer, his face inches from the man's. When he spoke, each word was precise, controlled, and absolutely terrifying in its calm. "You have 5 seconds to start talking, or I'm going to do something that will make you wish you'd never learned Ellen's name." 1. You can't. 2. I'm just a contractor. I don't know the. 3. The man's resolve cracked. 6 months. Maybe 7. I don't know exactly. They brought me in through a guy I knew from. He stopped, realizing he was confessing to everything. Xavier straightened slightly, still keeping the man pinned. Behind him, he could hear Ellen crying softly. The sound cut through him in a way that violence never had. "Who runs it?" Xavier demanded. "I don't know names. We never meet face to face. Everything's through encrypted apps, drop locations, anonymous payments. The guy who recruited me is dead overdose," they said. "But I think he talked to someone he shouldn't have. Where were you taking her?" The man hesitated. Xavier's foot pressed down harder. "Warehouse. A warehouse near the docks. District 7, by the old shipping yards. That's all I know, I swear." Xavier knew the area. Abandoned buildings. Minimal police presence. Easy access to the water. Perfect for moving cargo that couldn't be documented. Perfect for crimes that needed to disappear. He'd done business in that area himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. "How many?" Xavier asked, dreading the answer. "How many what?" "Children. How many children have moved through that warehouse?" The man's silence was answer enough. Xavier felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Not fear, never fear, but something close to rage so pure it threatened to override every calculated instinct he'd honed. He wanted to hurt this man, wanted to make him feel every ounce of terror those children had felt. But Ellen was behind him, watching, listening, trusting him to be something better than the monster she'd run from. Xavier pulled out his own phone and made a decision that would change everything. He dialed a number he'd saved years ago and never used a contact from a different life, a different version of himself. The voice that answered was sharp, professional. "Morrison. It's Alonzo." A pause. "Xavier? It's been 5 years? What do you—" "I need you to listen carefully," Xavier interrupted. "I'm sending you a location and evidence of a trafficking operation. Children, I need you to move on it tonight. No delays, no jurisdictional debates, no bureaucratic delays. Tonight. Xavier, I can't just—" "Yes, you can. Because if you don't, I will, and my methods won't leave anyone alive to stand trial." Another pause, then quieter. "Send me everything you have." Xavier began forwarding the contents of the trafficker's phone messages, photos, transaction records, locations, everything. He copied it all to his own device first, then sent it through encrypted channels to Detective Morrison, one of the few honest cops he'd ever encountered. The man beneath his foot was watching with growing horror. "You're insane. You just signed your own death warrant. They'll come for you. They'll—" "Let them," Xavier said simply. He looked down at the man with absolute contempt. "You're going to give me every detail you know, every location, every contact, every pattern, and then you're going to pray that the police reach you before my people do." "Your people? You're going to hand me over to the cops?" "Eventually." Xavier pulled his foot back, and in one motion, hauled the man to his feet. His grip on the man's collar was iron as he shoved him against the brick wall, keeping him at arm's length from Ellen. "But first," Xavier continued, his voice dropping to something that made the man's face go pale, "you're going to help me understand exactly how deep this goes, because right now, you're the only thing keeping me from killing everyone involved, and I'm starting to question why I'm showing that restraint." A car pulled into the alley entrance, black sedan, windows tinted, engine purring quietly. Xavier's lieutenant, Marco, stepped out, reading the situation instantly. "Boss? Take this piece of trash somewhere secure," Xavier ordered. "Make sure he's comfortable enough to talk, uncomfortable enough to be honest. I want names, locations, and a full network map by morning." Marco nodded, moving forward to restrain the trafficker. Xavier turned back to Ellen, kneeling down to her level. Rain poured over them both, but her eyes, terrified and hopeful and trusting, never left his face. "Are you going to leave me?" she whispered. Xavier felt something crack wider in his chest. "No," he said. "I'm going to make sure no one ever scares you again." The black sedan disappeared into the rain-soaked night, taillights bleeding red against the wet pavement. Xavier watched until it turned the corner, taking the trafficker with it. Only then did he allow himself to exhale, the tension in his shoulders refusing to ease. Ellen stood beside him, shivering violently now. Her gray dress clung to her small frame, soaked through, and the teddy bear in her arms dripped rainwater onto the pavement. Xavier realized with a start that she'd been standing in the rain for nearly 15 minutes. He shrugged off his suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders. It swallowed her completely, the hem dragging on the ground, but at least it was dry on the inside. Warm from his body heat. "Thank you," she whispered, pulling it tighter around herself. Xavier's phone buzzed. A text from Marco. "Safe house, awaiting your arrival." He looked down at Ellen, this tiny person who'd somehow upended his entire evening, his entire existence, in the span of 20 minutes. He couldn't take her to the safe house, that was no place for a child. But he couldn't leave her here either. "Ellen," he said gently, crouching to her level. "Do you know your mother's phone number?" She nodded, reciting it carefully, her small voice struggling with the cadence of the numbers. Xavier saved it, then dialed. It rang 4 times before going to voicemail. He tried again. Same result. A cold weight settled in his stomach. "When did you last see your mother?" he asked. "This morning. She walked me to the park and said she had to go to work. She works at the hospital, she's a nurse. She said Miss Carla would watch me until she came back at 5. Ellen's eyes filled with fresh tears. But that man came instead. He said Mama was hurt and I had to come with him right away. Xavier checked his watch. 7:47 p.m. Ellen's mother should have been looking for her for nearly 3 hours. Unless she couldn't. He made another call. This one was answered immediately. "Alonso," a female voice said crisply. "Wasn't expecting to hear from you tonight. Nina, I need you to locate someone. Rebecca Clark, nurse, likely works at County General or Mercy West. I need to know if she's safe, and I need to know now. On it. Give me 5 minutes." Xavier ended the call and looked around the alley. This wasn't the place to wait, too exposed, too open. He needed somewhere secure while he figured out the next move. "Come on," he said to Ellen, offering his hand. She took it without hesitation, her small fingers disappearing in his palm. They walked to his car, a sleek black Mercedes parked 2 blocks away. Xavier opened the back door, helped Ellen inside, and turned the heat on full blast. She curled into the leather seat, still clutching her teddy bear, and for the first time since she'd grabbed his sleeve, she looked like what she was, a terrified, exhausted child. Xavier sat in the driver's seat, engine idling, watching rain streak down the windshield. His mind was already working through scenarios, contingencies, problems that would cascade from the decision he'd made in that alley, because that's what it had been, a decision, a line crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. 20 years ago, Xavier Alonso had been someone else entirely, a kid from the South Side with a talent for reading people and an aptitude for violence when necessary. He'd been recruited into the Brotherhood, a mid-level criminal organization, at 19. By 25, he'd taken control of it through a combination of strategic brilliance and ruthless efficiency. He'd built his empire on simple principles: control every variable, show no weakness, and maintain clear boundaries. There were crimes he engaged in: extortion, gambling, money laundering, trafficking in weapons, and stolen goods. And there were crimes he didn't touch: drugs that targeted kids, human trafficking, anything involving children. Not because he was moral. Xavier had stopped believing in morality somewhere around his 100th felony, but because those crimes attracted attention, destabilized territories, and created enemies that couldn't be reasoned with or bought off, parents who'd lost children didn't negotiate. They burned everything to the ground. It was practical, strategic, nothing more, or so he'd told himself. But standing in that alley with Ellen's hand in his, looking at those messages on the trafficker's phone, Xavier had felt something he'd buried so deep he'd forgotten it existed. Rage on behalf of someone else, protective instinct that had nothing to do with territory or profit. It terrified him more than any rival ever had. His phone buzzed. "Nina, found her," Nina said without preamble. "Rebecca Clark, RN, works at County General. She called in a missing child report 3 hours ago. Police took the information but haven't issued an Amber Alert yet, said they're investigating whether it's a custody dispute first. She's at the police station now, demanding they do more." "She's safe?" Xavier asked. "Physically? Yes. Emotionally? She's apparently threatening to burn the precinct down if they don't find her daughter." Xavier felt something ease in his chest. "Text me the precinct address." "Already sent." "Xavier, what's going on?" "I'll explain later." He ended the call and glanced in the rearview mirror. Ellen had fallen asleep, her head resting against the window, one hand still gripping her teddy bear. Even in sleep, she looked afraid. Xavier sat there for a long moment, hands on the steering wheel, staring at nothing. He should drive her to the precinct, hand her over, walk away, go back to his empire, his operations, his carefully controlled existence, but he couldn't. Because the moment he'd seen that phone, the messages, the systematic evil operating under a veneer of normalcy, something had shifted. This wasn't an isolated incident. This was infrastructure, organization, protection from people who should have been protecting the victims. And it was operating in his city, under his nose, in territories he controlled. That made it his problem. More than that, it made it personal. Xavier made another call. This one went to Marco. "Boss, get everyone to the warehouse. Everyone we trust completely. I need full operational security, no phones, no external communication. We meet in 1 hour." "What's this about?" Xavier looked at Ellen's reflection in the mirror again. This small person who'd asked him to be her father, even if just for pretend. "We're going to war," Xavier said quietly. "But not the kind we're used to." "Against who?" "Monsters." Marco was silent for a moment. Then, "We're with you." Xavier ended the call and started driving. Not to the warehouse. Not yet. First, he had to return a daughter to her mother. Then he had to become something he'd never been before. Something more dangerous than a crime lord. A man with a purpose beyond profit. The precinct parking lot was half empty when Xavier pulled in, the Mercedes gliding into a space under a flickering streetlight. Through the rain-streaked windshield, he could see people moving inside the building, uniforms, civilians, the organized chaos of a city police station on a Thursday night. Ellen stirred in the back seat, her eyes opening slowly. For a moment she looked confused, disoriented. Then she saw Xavier and seemed to remember everything at once. Her small face crumpled. "It's okay," Xavier said gently, turning to face her. "Your mother is inside. She's been looking for you." Ellen sat up straighter, hope and fear warring on her face. "Really? She's okay?" "She's okay, and she's going to be very happy to see you." Xavier stepped out into the rain and opened her door. Ellen climbed out, still wrapped in his suit jacket, and looked up at the police station like it was both salvation and something terrifying. Xavier understood. Authority figures weren't always safe. She'd learned that tonight. He offered his hand. She took it. They walked through the rain together, an odd pair, a mafia boss in a wet dress shirt and a 6-year-old drowning in his jacket. The officer at the front desk looked up as they entered, his expression shifting from bored to alert in an instant. "I'm here to return Ellen Clark to her mother," Xavier said calmly. "Rebecca Clark. I believe she filed a missing person report." The officer's eyes moved between Xavier and Ellen, trying to piece together what he was seeing. Before he could respond, a woman's voice cut through the station like a knife. "Ellen." A blonde woman in nurse's scrubs came running from a side room, her face streaked with tears, her eyes wild with a mother's terror. Ellen let go of Xavier's hand and ran to meet her, and they collided in the middle of the lobby in a tangle of arms and sobbing. "Baby! Oh, my baby! I thought." Rebecca couldn't finish, couldn't form words through the tears. She just held Ellen tighter, checking her over frantically, smoothing back her wet hair, pressing kisses to her forehead. Xavier stood back, watching. Something uncomfortable twisted in his chest. Something that felt almost like longing for a connection he'd never known, never thought he wanted. Rebecca looked up, her eyes landing on Xavier. Suspicion flickered across her face even as she held her daughter. "Who are you? How did you—" "He saved me, Mama," Ellen said, her voice muffled against her mother's shoulder. "The bad man tried to take me, but he stopped him. He pretended to be my dad and kept me safe." Rebecca's expression shifted through a dozen emotions: confusion, gratitude, residual fear, and something that looked almost like recognition. She stood slowly, still holding Ellen against her hip despite the girl's weight. "You're Xavier Alonso," she said quietly. Xavier said nothing. His reputation had preceded him, as it always did. "I've seen your picture. I work trauma at County General. We see what happens when people cross you." She held her daughter tighter. "Why would you help my little girl?" It was a fair question. Xavier had asked himself the same thing. "Because she asked me to," he said simply. "And because the man trying to take her was part of something worse than either of you should ever have to know about." A detective emerged from the back, older, weathered, with the tired eyes of someone who'd seen too much. He looked at Xavier, and mutual recognition passed between them. "Alonso, Morrison told me you might show up." "Detective Williams," Xavier acknowledged. "You got the bastard who tried to take her? My people have him secured. He's talking. You'll have him and everything he knows within the hour." Williams nodded slowly, then looked at Rebecca. "Mrs. Clark, I'm going to need to take your statement. And Ellen's, if she's up for it." Rebecca hesitated, looking at her daughter. Ellen was already falling asleep again, exhausted by terror and relief. "Can it wait until morning? Please, I just want to take her home." "Tomorrow morning, first thing," Williams agreed. He turned to Xavier. "We're going to need your statement too. You'll have it, along with everything else." Ellen lifted her head from her mother's shoulder, looking back at Xavier with sleepy eyes. "Are you leaving?" Xavier stepped closer, crouching down to her level one last time. "I have to go take care of something. But you're safe now. Your mother's here, and these people are going to make sure nothing bad happens to you." "Will I see you again?" The question caught him off guard. He opened his mouth, not sure what to say. What did you tell a child who'd trusted you with her life? How did you explain that he existed in a world she should never touch again? "Maybe," he said finally. "But even if you don't, I want you to remember something. You were very brave tonight. You ran when you needed to run. You asked for help when you needed help. And you survived because you're smart and strong. Don't forget that." Ellen reached out and hugged him, a quick, fierce embrace that lasted only seconds but somehow felt heavier than anything Xavier had carried in 20 years. Then she was back in her mother's arms, and Rebecca was mouthing "thank you," with tears streaming down her face. Xavier nodded once and turned toward the door. "Alonso," Williams called after him. "Whatever you're planning, be careful. These people have reach, more than you might think." Xavier looked back, and for just a moment, something cold and lethal flickered across his face. "So do I." The warehouse Xavier owned sat in an industrial district on the city's edge, legitimate on paper, useful for less legitimate purposes when needed. By the time he arrived, cars already lined the gravel lot outside. His people were gathering. Xavier walked through the main entrance into a space that smelled of oil and metal. 40 men stood in loose formation, faces he'd known for years, soldiers who'd built his empire alongside him. Marco stood at the front, arms crossed, watching his boss enter with an expression of controlled curiosity. "Everyone's here," Marco said. "No phones, like you asked. What's this about, Xavier?" Xavier moved to stand before them, rain still dripping from his clothes, and for a moment he just looked at them. These were dangerous men. Criminals, every one of them. But they were his criminals. They'd followed him through wars, takeovers, and power struggles. They'd bled for him. Now he was going to ask them to bleed for something else. "Tonight I encountered something operating in our city," Xavier began, his voice carrying through the warehouse. "A trafficking network. Children, they've been running operations right under our noses, protected by corrupt officials, hidden behind legitimate businesses." Murmurs rippled through the group. Some looked confused, others looked angry. "I know what some of you are thinking," Xavier continued. "This isn't our business. We don't touch that world, so it's not our problem. But it is. Because these people are operating in territories we control, using infrastructure we built, And they're doing it because they think we won't notice or won't care. He paused, letting that sink in. They're wrong. Xavier pulled out the trafficker's phone, held it up. I have evidence. Locations, names, patterns. A warehouse in District 7 is being used as a transfer point. Tomorrow night, there's another exchange scheduled. Multiple children. What are you asking us to do? Someone called from the back. Xavier's expression hardened. I'm not asking. I'm telling you. Tomorrow night, we hit that warehouse. We extract those children. We burn this operation to the ground, and we make it very clear that anyone who touches a child in this city has made an enemy of Xavier Alonso. The silence that followed was heavy, uncertain. Then Marco stepped forward. I'm in, he said simply. One by one, others began nodding, stepping forward, adding their agreement. Not all of them. 3 men at the back exchanged looks and quietly slipped out. Xavier noted their faces. They'd be dealt with later, but most stayed. This isn't like our usual operations, Xavier warned. This is war without profit. This makes enemies who won't negotiate. This crosses lines that can't be uncrossed. Then we cross them, someone said. Xavier looked at Ellen's teddy bear sitting on the warehouse floor. She'd left it in his car and felt something settle into place. A purpose beyond power. Get some rest, he ordered. Tomorrow we plan. Tomorrow night, we move. As his people dispersed, Xavier stayed behind, staring at the evidence on the phone's screen. Somewhere in this city, children were waiting in the dark, hoping someone would save them. He would, even if it cost him everything, because a little girl had asked him to pretend to be her father. And Xavier Alonso didn't break promises. The docks at midnight were a study in shadows and rust. Warehouses loomed like hollow giants against the night sky, their broken windows reflecting fragments of moonlight. The smell of salt water and oil hung thick in the air, carried by a cold wind that made the corrugated metal walls creak and groan. Xavier stood in the darkness 200 yards from the target building, watching, waiting. Around him, 37 men moved with practiced silence, spreading out in predetermined positions. They'd spent the entire day planning this entry points, escape routes, contingencies for every scenario Xavier's paranoid mind could imagine. But no plan survived first contact. He knew that better than anyone. Marco materialized beside him, his face painted with dark grease to reduce visibility. Thermal imaging confirms at least 4 adults inside, ground floor, northwest corner. And he paused, his jaw tightening. 7 heat signatures in what looks like a holding area. Small, child-sized. 7 children. 7 lives hanging in the balance while monsters treated them like inventory. Xavier's hands clenched into fists. He forced himself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. Rage was a tool, not a weakness, but only if you controlled it. Guard positions? He asked. 2 outside, rotating patrol. 1 at the main entrance, 1 watching the water side, both armed. Inside? At least 2 more with the children. Can't confirm if there are others in the upper levels. Xavier studied the warehouse through night vision binoculars. It was a 3-story structure, mostly abandoned except for this operation. The main entrance was a rolling steel door, currently closed. Side entrance was smaller, likely locked. Upper windows were accessible but would require climbing. His phone vibrated silently. A text from Detective Morrison. In position. Waiting for your signal. Do not engage before we arrive. Xavier didn't respond. Morrison was a good cop, one of the few honest ones left, but he didn't understand. By the time police paperwork was filed, by the time warrants were issued and tactical teams assembled, those children would be gone, moved, disappeared into a network that spanned cities, maybe countries. This ended tonight. Xavier turned to Marco. We move in 5 minutes. Remember, no one fires unless I give the word. The children's safety is the only priority. Everyone else is secondary. Even us? Marco asked. Even us. Marco nodded and melted back into the darkness to relay the orders. Xavier checked his weapon, a Glock 19. Suppressor already attached. He'd carried it for 15 years and never once used it to protect something innocent. There was a first time for everything. The 5 minutes felt like 5 hours. Xavier counted every second, his mind running through scenarios, calculating angles, assessing risks. Finally, he raised his hand, gave the signal. 37 shadows moved as one. The exterior guards never saw them coming. Xavier's people were efficient, professional, and utterly silent. 2 men dropped simultaneously, zip-tied and gagged. dragged into the darkness before they could raise an alarm. Xavier reached the side entrance. The lock was industrial grade, but Marco had it open in 30 seconds. The door swung inward with barely a whisper of sound. Inside, the warehouse was a cavern of darkness broken by pools of harsh light from portable work lamps. Boxes and crates were stacked haphazardly, creating a maze of corridors and dead ends. Somewhere in the distance, Xavier could hear voices, casual, relaxed, the sound of men who thought they were safe. They were wrong. Xavier moved through the shadows like smoke, his team spreading out in coordinated patterns they'd practiced 100 times in 100 different operations. This time, though, the stakes were different. This time, they weren't stealing cargo or eliminating rivals. This time, they were saving lives. He heard them before he saw them, children's voices, quiet and scared, speaking in whispers that shouldn't exist in a world that had any justice. Xavier rounded a corner and stopped. The holding area was a section of the warehouse partitioned off with chain-link fencing, like a cage in a zoo. Inside, 7 children sat on the concrete floor. The youngest looked maybe 4 years old. The oldest couldn't have been more than 10. They wore mismatched clothes, their faces marked by fear and exhaustion that no child should know. 2 men stood guard outside the cage, both armed with pistols holstered at their hips. They were talking, laughing about something Xavier couldn't hear over the roaring in his ears. He raised his hand. "Stop." His team froze in position, waiting. Xavier stepped out of the shadows. "Gentlemen," he said quietly. Both guards spun, hands flying to their weapons. They froze when they saw who stood before them, and more importantly, what stood behind him. 15 armed men emerging from the darkness like demons made flesh. "Don't," Xavier said, his voice carrying absolute authority. "You move, you die. You speak, you die. You even think about those children, and I'll make sure your death takes hours." One of the guards, younger, stupider, went for his gun anyway. Marco's suppressed weapon coughed once. The guard dropped, clutching his shoulder, his gun clattering across the concrete. The sound echoed through the warehouse like thunder. So much for quiet. "Everyone down, now!" Xavier barked at his team. From somewhere above, shouts erupted. Footsteps pounded on metal stairs. More guards, more threats, converging on their position. Xavier moved to the chain-link fence. The children inside pressed back against the far wall, terrified now of everyone, unable to distinguish saviors from monsters. One little girl, dark hair, maybe 6 years old, was crying silently, her hands pressed over her mouth. She reminded him of Ellen. "Listen to me," Xavier said, his voice firm but gentle. "My name is Xavier. I'm here to get you out. But I need you to stay down, stay quiet, and trust me. Can you do that?" None of them answered. Fear had stolen their voices. Gunfire erupted from the upper level. Bullets sparked off metal beams, ricocheted off concrete. Xavier's team returned fire, controlled bursts, moving with tactical precision. Marco appeared beside Xavier, already working on the padlock securing the cage. "We've got maybe 2 minutes before this place turns into a war zone. Police are moving in, I can hear sirens." "Good," Xavier said. "Get these children to the east exit, now." The padlock snapped open. Marco pulled the gate wide. "Come on," Xavier said, reaching toward the children. "We're leaving. All of you, right now." The oldest, a boy with haunted eyes, stood first. He took Xavier's hand, and that seemed to give the others courage. One by one, they came forward, clustering around the dangerous men who'd come to save them. Xavier lifted the smallest, the dark-haired girl who reminded him of Ellen, into his arms. She buried her face against his shoulder, trembling. "I've got you," he whispered. "You're safe now." More gunfire. "Closer now." Someone screamed, one of Xavier's men, hit but not down. The situation was deteriorating fast. "Move," Xavier ordered. They ran through the warehouse maze, children in the center, armed men forming a protective shell around them. Bullets whined through the air. Someone was shouting orders, coordinating the guards' response. Xavier's team laid down, suppressing fire, moving and shooting with disciplined efficiency. They reached the east exit just as police lights flooded the parking lot outside, turning night into blazing day. "Hands up! Everyone on the ground, now!" Xavier set the little girl down gently, raised his hands, and stepped forward into the light where the police could see him clearly. "My name is Xavier Alonso," he called out. "These children are trafficking victims. The men inside are the traffickers. We've secured the scene for you." Detective Morrison pushed through the police line, his face a mixture of relief and fury. I told you to wait. You would have been too late, Xavier said simply. Behind him, his men were laying down their weapons, hands raised, allowing themselves to be secured. The children huddled together, freed but still terrified. As paramedics rushed forward, Xavier watched them being led away to safety, wrapped in blankets, and felt something he hadn't felt in 20 years. Not pride, not satisfaction, peace. The parking lot had transformed into a circus of flashing lights, police cruisers, ambulances, unmarked detective vehicles, and a SWAT van that had arrived too late to matter. Officers swarmed the warehouse, securing the scene, documenting evidence, arresting the traffickers who'd survived the confrontation. Xavier sat on the bumper of an ambulance, hands zip-tied in front of him, watching the controlled chaos unfold. A paramedic had insisted on checking the cut above his eyebrow. A ricochet fragment had grazed him during the firefight, but he barely felt it. His attention was fixed on the children being led to waiting ambulances, each one wrapped in thermal blankets, each one still looking over their shoulders like they expected the nightmare to resume. The dark-haired girl he'd carried out looked back at him once. Their eyes met across the parking lot, and she raised one small hand in a tentative wave. Xavier nodded back, something tight clenching in his chest. "You're lucky you're not in a body bag," Detective Morrison said, appearing beside him with 2 paper coffee cups. He handed one to Xavier despite the zip ties, helping him grip it between his bound hands. "Lucky had nothing to do with it," Xavier replied, taking a sip. It was terrible coffee, burnt, bitter. Probably 6 hours old. He drank it anyway. Morrison sat down heavily beside him, exhaustion etched into every line of his weathered face. 7 children. 7 kids who would have disappeared tonight if you hadn't. He stopped, shaking his head. "I don't know whether to arrest you or give you a medal." "Arrest me," Xavier said. "It'll be easier to explain. We found 4 traffickers alive inside, 3 dead. All of them are talking, the live ones, I mean. Trying to cut deals, pointing fingers, naming names." Morrison turned to look at Xavier directly. "They're terrified. Not of going to prison. Of you. They think you're going to come after everyone connected to this operation." Xavier said nothing. He sipped his terrible coffee and watched officers escort another handcuffed trafficker to a patrol car. "Are they right?" Morrison asked quietly. "Are you going after everyone? What do you think?" Morrison was silent for a long moment. Then, "I think you just declared war on some very powerful people. People with connections in places that should matter. City Hall, the department, the DA's office. They're going to come at you with everything they have. Let them." "Xavier, I'm serious. This isn't like your usual territory disputes. These people operate in the shadows, behind legitimate businesses and political donations. They don't fight fair, and they don't leave witnesses." Xavier turned to look at Morrison, his expression cold and absolutely certain. "Neither do I." A commotion erupted near the warehouse entrance. Officers were bringing out more evidence, boxes of documents, hard drives, phones, everything they'd seized from inside. Behind them came a man in an expensive suit, his hands cuffed behind his back, his face twisted with indignant rage. "This is illegal seizure," the man shouted. "I have rights. I want my lawyer. You have no idea who you're dealing with." Morrison stood up slowly. "That's Gerald Ashford. He's a city councilman. Or was, anyway." Xavier watched as Ashford was loaded into a patrol car, still shouting threats about lawsuits and consequences. "He was inside? Arrived about 20 minutes before you hit the place. We've got him on video surveillance, documented entry, the whole package." Morrison smiled grimly. "He came to inspect his merchandise. Instead, he's going to spend the next 20 years in a cell, assuming he survives that long. Child traffickers don't do well in general population." "Good," Xavier said simply. More cars arrived, unmarked sedans, government plates. Men and women in FBI windbreakers began emerging, taking control of the scene with the kind of authority that made local police step back. Morrison swore under his breath. "Federal task force. Someone must have made a call." He looked at Xavier. This just got a lot bigger than a local operation. Xavier watched the FBI agents moving through the scene with practiced efficiency. This was good. Federal jurisdiction meant federal resources, federal prosecutions. It meant these people wouldn't slip through legal loopholes or get released on technicalities. It also meant Xavier's role in tonight's operation would be scrutinized from every angle. An FBI agent approached a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor. Her badge read, "Agent Sarah Chen." "Xavier Alonso?" she asked. That's me. I'm Agent Chen, FBI Human Trafficking Task Force. We need to talk about what happened here tonight. Morrison stood up protectively. My department has jurisdiction. Had jurisdiction, Chen corrected, not unkindly. This is a federal investigation now. Mr. Alonso, you're not under arrest at this time. But you are a material witness. We need your full cooperation. Remove the zip ties, Xavier said calmly. I'll tell you everything you want to know. Chen studied him for a moment, then nodded to another agent, who cut the restraints. Xavier rubbed his wrists, finished his coffee, and stood to face her. Walk with me, Chen said. They moved away from the crowd, toward the water's edge where the dock stretched into darkness. The wind was cold off the ocean, carrying the smell of salt and oil. Behind them, the warehouse blazed with artificial light as investigators documented every corner. You know who I am, Xavier said. It wasn't a question. I know exactly who you are, Mr. Alonso. Criminal record dating back 20 years. Suspected involvement in organized crime, extortion, money laundering, weapons trafficking. You've been arrested 6 times and convicted 0 times because witnesses have a habit of developing amnesia or disappearing. Chen turned to face him. You're a very dangerous man. And yet 7 children are alive tonight because of me. I'm not here to debate morality with you. I'm here because you have information about a trafficking network that we've been trying to infiltrate for 18 months. Chen pulled out a tablet, showing Xavier a network diagram, names, connections, businesses, all linked in a web of corruption. We know this goes deep. Ashford is just one piece. We need the rest. Xavier looked at the diagram, his mind already identifying connections, filling in gaps the FBI hadn't found yet. What are you offering? Immunity for tonight's actions. Full cooperation means we don't charge you or your people with breaking and entering, assault, weapons violations, or vigilante justice. You walk away clean. And in exchange? Everything you know, everyone you can identify, every piece of evidence you collected. Chen's expression hardened. And you stop. No more solo operations. No more taking the law into your own hands. You feed us information. We do the rest legally. Xavier laughed a short, bitter sound. You want me to sit back and trust the system? The same system that let this operation run for years? The same system that had a city councilman inspecting children like livestock? The system has flaws, Chen admitted. But it's the system we have. And vigilante justice, no matter how well-intentioned, creates more problems than it solves. Xavier looked back at the warehouse, at the ambulances still loading children, at his men being processed and released one by one. Marco caught his eye from across the lot, gave a subtle nod. Everyone was accounted for. Everyone was safe. I'll give you everything I have, Xavier said finally. Names, locations, evidence from the phones and documents we seized. But I'm not making promises about what I do next. That's not good enough. It's all you're getting. Xavier turned to face Chen directly. Those children in there? They trusted the system to protect them, and the system failed. Parents trusted teachers, social workers, police to keep their kids safe. The system failed. So don't stand here and lecture me about legal process when your legal process created the vacuum these monsters operated in. Chen's jaw tightened, but she didn't argue. She couldn't, because he was right. Give me what you have, she said quietly. We'll start there. Xavier pulled out the trafficker's phone he'd taken from the alley 2 nights ago. Was it really only 2 nights? And handed it to her. Everything's on there. Coordinates, transaction records, contacts. Your tech people can unlock the encrypted files. Chen took the phone, examining it briefly before securing it in an evidence bag. We'll need formal statements from you and your people. Tomorrow. Tonight. We're done. Mr. Alonso. Tomorrow, Xavier repeated, his tone making it clear the conversation was over. Chen studied him for a long moment, then nodded. Don't leave the city. Wasn't planning to. As Chen walked back toward the warehouse, Morrison reappeared at Xavier's side. You handled that well. Most people would have tried to negotiate harder, get more guarantees. Xavier watched the last child being loaded into an ambulance, the doors closing, the vehicle pulling away with lights flashing but no siren. Safe, protected, heading toward a future that wouldn't include tonight's horror. I don't need guarantees, Xavier said quietly. I need results. You know this isn't over, right? Taking down Ashford will send shockwaves. Other people involved will try to cover their tracks, eliminate witnesses. It's going to get dangerous. Xavier smiled cold, predatory. The the smile that had made him a legend in the underworld. Good. I was just starting to enjoy myself. Morrison shook his head but couldn't quite suppress a small smile. You're insane. You know that? So I've been told. They stood together in silence, watching the organized chaos wind down, watching the first rays of dawn begin to lighten the eastern sky. Somewhere in the city, Ellen Clark was sleeping safely in her mother's arms. Somewhere close by, 7 more children were beginning the long journey toward healing. And somewhere in the shadows, monsters were realizing that Xavier Alonso had just become their worst nightmare. The balance of power had shifted. Fear had changed sides. Xavier returned to his apartment as the sun climbed over the city skyline, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. He'd given his statement to the FBI, coordinated his team's release, and ensured every piece of evidence reached the right hands. Now, exhausted and running on nothing but adrenaline and bad coffee, he just wanted silence, but his phone buzzed before he could even remove his jacket. A text from an unknown number. Ellen wants to see you. Rebecca Clark. Xavier stared at the message for a long moment. He should decline, should maintain distance. He'd done what needed doing. The girl was safe. The operation was dismantled. Justice was in motion. Getting further involved served no purpose. He texted back the address of a diner 2 blocks from his apartment. An hour later, he sat in a corner booth, watching the door. Rebecca entered first, scanning the room nervously. Then Ellen appeared beside her, clutching that same worn teddy bear. The girl's eyes found Xavier immediately, and her entire face lit up. She ran to him. Xavier barely had time to process it before Ellen crashed into him, wrapping her small arms around his waist in a fierce hug. He froze, hands hovering uncertainly, before gently resting one on her shoulder. You came back, Ellen whispered against his shirt. I said I would. Rebecca slid into the booth across from them, her eyes red-rimmed but grateful. A waitress appeared, took their orders, hot chocolate for Ellen, coffee for the adults, and disappeared with practiced efficiency. The FBI came by this morning, Rebecca said quietly. They told me everything. About the warehouse, the other children, how you... She stopped, composing herself. How you saved them all. Xavier said nothing. What was there to say? Ellen pulled back, looking up at him with those impossibly trusting blue eyes. Are you really my dad? The question hit Xavier harder than any bullet. Rebecca started to intervene, but Xavier raised a hand gently, stopping her. He knelt down beside the booth, bringing himself to Ellen's eye level. No, he said honestly. I'm not your dad. Ellen's face fell. But, Xavier continued, his voice soft but firm, that doesn't mean I'm going anywhere. You needed help and I helped you, and if you ever need help again, I'll be there. Promise? Xavier looked at this child who'd grabbed his hand in a dark alley and asked him to be something he'd never been, someone's protector, someone's hero. She'd seen past the reputation, past the fear, past everything that made him dangerous, and found something worth trusting. I promise, he said. Ellen hugged him again, and this time Xavier didn't hesitate. He held her gently, feeling something fundamental shift inside his chest, not breaking, but reforming into a different shape. Rebecca was crying silently across the table, witnessing something she clearly hadn't expected. When Ellen finally released Xavier and climbed back into her seat, Rebecca reached across and took his hand. Thank you, she whispered, for being there when no one else was, for protecting her when the system failed. Xavier nodded once, pulling his hand back. Gratitude made him uncomfortable. He'd spent 20 years being feared, not thanked. Their orders arrived. Ellen drank her hot chocolate, talking about her favorite cartoons and what she wanted for her birthday next month. The resilience of childhood already working to heal trauma. Rebecca listened, smiled, occasionally wiping tears from her eyes. But Xavier noticed what they didn't say, the careful way Rebecca watched the door, the way Ellen flinched when a stranger walked too close to their booth. Are you safe? Xavier asked quietly when Ellen was distracted by her teddy bear. Rebecca's smile faltered. The FBI has someone watching our building. They say the major players are being arrested, that we're not in danger. That's not what I asked. Rebecca met his eyes. I don't feel safe. Ellen wakes up screaming every night. I'm terrified every time she's out of my sight. The FBI says it'll get better, but... She trailed off. Xavier pulled out a business card blank except for a phone number. He slid it across the table. If anything feels wrong, if anyone approaches you, if you even suspect something isn't right, call that number. Immediately, day or night. Xavier, You've already done so much. Call the number, he repeated firmly. Rebecca took the card, tucking it carefully into her wallet. Ellen looked up, hot chocolate mustache on her upper lip. Will you come to my birthday party? Xavier saw Rebecca's surprise, saw her uncertainty. He should say no, should maintain boundaries. When is it? He asked. 3 weeks. I'll be 7. I'll be there, Xavier said. He watched them leave 20 minutes later, Ellen skipping beside her mother, waving enthusiastically as they disappeared down the sidewalk. Xavier sat alone in the booth, staring at his untouched coffee, wondering what the hell he'd just committed to. His phone buzzed. Marco, need to talk. It's important. Xavier paid the bill and headed out into the city streets, knowing that while one chapter had ended, another far more dangerous was just beginning. The warehouse where Xavier conducted legitimate business operations was nearly full when he arrived. Not with cargo or inventory, but with people. His entire organization had assembled lieutenants, soldiers, associates, everyone who'd built this empire alongside him. They were waiting. Marco stood near the front, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. Others shifted nervously, uncertain why they'd been summoned. Rumors had been spreading since the docks operation whispers about what Xavier had done, who he'd crossed, what it meant for their future. Xavier walked through the crowd to stand on the loading platform, elevated so everyone could see him. The murmuring stopped immediately. 4 days ago, Xavier began, his voice carrying through the warehouse. I encountered something in this city that I won't tolerate. A trafficking network operating children like commodities. Some of you know what happened at the docks. Some of you participated. All of you have questions. Heads nodded throughout the crowd. I'm going to be direct. This organization was built on certain principles: control, profit, loyalty. We've operated in gray areas, crossed legal lines, done things that would put us away for life if proven. I've never apologized for that because everyone here made their choice willingly. Xavier paused, scanning the faces before him. But there are lines I won't cross. Lines I thought were understood, but apparently need to be stated explicitly. His voice hardened. Anyone involved in human trafficking, particularly children, is no longer welcome in this organization. Anyone who knowingly assists, enables, or protects such operations will be considered my enemy. Shocked silence rippled through the warehouse. Furthermore, Xavier continued, every operation we control, every territory we manage, will be monitored. If we discover trafficking activity, we don't look away. We don't call it not our business. We end it. A voice called out from the middle of the crowd. With respect, boss, that's going to make powerful enemies. People connected to those operations have reach, money, political protection. I know exactly what they have, Xavier said coldly. And I don't care. Marco stepped forward, standing beside Xavier in a clear show of support. Some of us saw those kids at the docks. What they'd been through. Anyone who can do that to children isn't someone I want as an ally, no matter how much money or power they have. Murmurs of agreement spread through the crowd, but not universal ones. An older lieutenant named Vincent pushed his way forward. You're asking us to choose between profit and principles. In our world, that's how you get killed. I'm not asking, Xavier said quietly. I'm telling you, this is the new line. You either accept it or you leave. Right now. No judgment, no consequences. Walk out that door, and we part ways professionally. Vincent stared at him for a long moment. Then 3 men near the back began moving toward the exit. Then 2 more. Then Vincent himself turned and walked away without another word. 7 men total, out of nearly 50. The door closed behind them, and Xavier felt the weight of what he'd just done. He'd fractured his organization, weakened his position, made himself vulnerable to rivals who'd see this as opportunity. He didn't regret it for a second. The rest of you? Xavier said to those who remained. Understand this means war, not for territory, not for profit. But because there are some things worth fighting for that don't show up on a balance sheet. What do you need from us? Someone asked. Xavier looked at Marco, who nodded and distributed folders to the remaining lieutenants. Information network. We're going to identify every trafficking operation in this city. Every location, every participant, every enabler. Then we're going to systematically dismantle them. We'll work with law enforcement when possible. When it's not possible, Xavier let the implication hang. This is going to cost money, time, resources, another lieutenant pointed out. What's our return? Peace, Xavier said simply. The knowledge that we're not the worst thing in this city. The warehouse erupted in discussion, some supportive, others skeptical, all uncertain about this new direction. Xavier let them talk, let them process. This was unprecedented. Criminal organizations didn't suddenly develop ethics. They didn't wage war for moral principles. But Xavier Alonso wasn't every criminal. A phone rang loud, cutting through the conversation. Marco answered, listened, his expression darkening. He covered the phone and approached Xavier. Problem. The FBI just arrested Judge Hammond. He's been named as protecting trafficking operations. His attorney is already making calls. And word is he's threatening to expose everyone who's crossed him, including you. Xavier felt the first domino beginning to fall. Let him, Xavier said. Whatever he says about me is probably true anyway. But make sure the FBI knows we'll testify if needed. Marco's eyebrows rose. Testify? In court? Boss, that's necessary, Xavier finished. We can't ask others to stand up if we won't. A younger soldier pushed forward, his face angry. You're asking us to become rats? To cooperate with cops? That's against everything we stand for. Xavier stepped down from the platform, walking directly to the young man. They stood face to face, tension crackling between them. Everything we stood for, Xavier corrected quietly. Protected monsters. I won't do that anymore. If that makes me a rat, so be it. The young man stared, then slowly nodded and stepped back. Xavier returned to the platform. Anyone who wants out last chance. No judgment. Nobody moved. Then here's what happens next. We protect this city's children. We root out the evil operating in shadows. And we remind everyone who forgot that Xavier Alonso doesn't just take sometimes. He gives back. Ellen's birthday party was exactly what Xavier expected. Chaos, laughter, children running everywhere with frosting-covered faces. He stood awkwardly near the refreshment table in Rebecca's modest apartment, surrounded by balloons and streamers, completely out of his element. You came! Ellen appeared beside him, wearing a purple dress and a paper crown, her smile radiant. I promised, Xavier said, handing her a wrapped gift. She tore into it immediately, revealing a new teddy bear, this one with both eyes intact, soft and clean and safe. Ellen hugged it, then hugged Xavier, then ran off to show her friends. Rebecca approached with 2 cups of punch. Thank you for coming. It means everything to her. How's she doing? Xavier asked, watching Ellen play. Better. Still nightmares, but less frequent. Therapy's helping. Rebecca paused. The FBI told me they've made 37 arrests connected to the trafficking ring. They say it's one of the largest busts in state history. Xavier nodded. He knew. He'd provided information that led to half those arrests. They also told me that you've been active, that you're hunting down everyone involved. Rebecca's voice dropped. Is that true? Would it bother you if it was? Rebecca considered this. A month ago, I would have said yes. That vigilante justice is wrong, that the system exists for a reason. But then my daughter was almost taken by that system's failures. So no, Xavier, it doesn't bother me. It makes me grateful. A commotion at the door interrupted them. 2 FBI agents entered Agent Chen and her partner. The party atmosphere dimmed immediately. Chen approached Xavier directly. We need to talk. Outside. Xavier followed them into the hallway, Rebecca close behind despite Chen's objections. We've arrested everyone on your list, Chen said without preamble. 43 people total, including 2 state senators, 5 judges, and a dozen law enforcement officials. The entire network is collapsing. That's good news, Xavier said carefully. It is, but there's a problem. 3 witnesses have recanted. 4 others have disappeared. Someone's cleaning up loose ends, and they're moving fast. Chen's expression hardened. You're on their list. So is Rebecca Clark and her daughter. Xavier felt ice flood his veins. Protection? We're stretched thin, but I can have agents outside. Not good enough, Xavier interrupted. These people have resources, patience. They'll wait however long it takes. What are you suggesting? Xavier looked at Rebecca. How would you feel about staying somewhere safe? Just for a while. Where? Rebecca asked, fear creeping into her voice. Somewhere no one would think to look. A place I own outside the city. Secure, private, monitored. Xavier turned to Chen, with FBI surveillance added. Chen considered this. It's irregular, but, given the circumstances, I'll approve it. Temporary protective custody in a secure private location. Rebecca hesitated. Ellen's school, my job, are less important than your lives, Xavier said firmly. Let me protect you, please. Something in his voice must have convinced her. Rebecca nodded slowly. Xavier made arrangements immediately. Phone calls, logistics, coordination with Chen's team. Within 2 hours, Rebecca and Ellen were being driven to a property Xavier maintained in the mountains, a place even most of his organization didn't know about. Ellen hugged him before leaving. Will you visit? When I can, Xavier promised. And when the bad people are gone? She asked, that 6-year-old wisdom cutting straight to truth. Xavier knelt down, meeting her eyes. When the bad people are gone, you'll come home, and you'll be safe, I promise. Ellen hugged her new teddy bear. Thank you for being my pretend dad. You're welcome, Ellen. He watched their car disappear into traffic, then turned back to find Marco waiting with grim news. The people who disappeared? We found them. All dead. Professional hits. Marco handed Xavier a folder. But we found something else. Financial records linking the trafficking network to the Volkov family. Xavier's blood ran cold. The Volkovs were Russian organized crime, powerful, ruthless, with international reach. If they were involved, this was bigger than he'd imagined. They know we're coming for them, Marco said. Word is they've put a price on your head. 2 million. Xavier smiled cold, predatory. Only 2 million? I'm insulted. Boss, this is serious. The Volkovs don't mess around. They'll come with everything. So will I. Over the following days, Xavier's war intensified. His people moved through the city like ghosts, gathering intelligence, disrupting operations, protecting victims. The Volkovs responded with violence. 3 of Xavier's warehouses were firebombed, 2 of his soldiers were killed, and attempts were made on his life twice. But Xavier didn't back down. He adapted, evolving from crime lord to something different, a protector operating outside law, but alongside it, working with FBI and police when possible, acting independently when necessary. His reputation changed. Street-level criminals still feared him, but now parents in struggling neighborhoods whispered his name with something else. Hope. When trafficking attempts occurred, anonymous tips appeared. When predators operated, they mysteriously disappeared. Xavier Alonso remained dangerous, but now, he was dangerous for the right reasons. Standing in his office one evening, looking out over the city lights, Xavier's phone buzzed. A text from Ellen. I drew you a picture. Mom says you're our guardian angel. Xavier stared at the message, then at his reflection in the window. Guardian angel. Him. The irony was almost funny, but maybe that's what redemption looked like, not erasing the past, but choosing differently when it mattered. Not becoming good, but being better. His phone rang. Marco, with news of another operation to dismantle. Xavier answered without hesitation. Tell me everything, because a little girl had once asked him to pretend to be her father, and Xavier Alonso had discovered something worth protecting more than power. Sometimes pretending changes who you really are, and sometimes that's exactly what you need. Thanks for staying with this story right till the final moment. You're the reason these stories come alive. If you're ready for another powerful journey, just tap the next video on your screen. And before you go, leave a quick comment and rate this story from 1 to 10. I'm excited to see your thoughts and connect with you down there.